Well, thanks for joining me in this episode. I have focused a lot on governance in the last 12 months, so figuring 2025. And the reason is that dysfunction in any business or organization, I believe, starts at the top. So if the leaders are messed up and dysfunctional, you can pretty much guarantee that the entire organization is going to have a healthy amount of dysfunction as well. And why that matters in private clubs and when it comes to growing revenue in private clubs is that we all know who the messed up clubs are in our market. People love to talk, and as a private club, your reputation matters, especially when it's trying to add members. So when there's a little bit of dysfunction, it spreads through the community, then people know, and it can be a PR nightmare for a lot of private clubs. So with that as a backdrop, I turned to Tom Wallace, who I mentioned from Kopplin, Kuebler, Wallace, for a little bit of perspective and insight on how leaders can avoid turning their club into dysfunction junction. Here's my conversation with Tom Wallace. You're listening to Crushing Club Marketing, a podcast for progressive club leaders ready to increase their club's revenue. Time for change begins right now. Well, Tom, thanks so much for joining me.
Well, happy to be here.
Well, this is that time of year, and it's very busy, I know, for you guys, especially as we get close to the holidays. At the time of this recording, we are days away from Christmas. So I know it's a busy time, but it's also a busy time for a lot of your clients, and I know for a lot of clubs that are transitioning. And as we remind our team, at least, is that clubs are still working. I mean, people are still going to work and taking care of their members and. Right. So
yeah. Oh, everybody's always like, I hate to bother you on the weekend. I said, this is just because I'm not managing clubs anymore. We're still 7 days a week because the club industry is a 7 day a week, industry for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Things are still happening, but this is that time of year where officers are changing at clubs, board members are rolling on, board members are rolling off, and so. There are a lot of people that are maybe joining a club board for the first time. And there are probably, a lot of clubs that are, have different challenges in transition. But I guess, the first thing I'm wondering is that, in your experience, like how many clubs, if you were just kind of, shoot from the hip, how many clubs are actually really well prepared for transition with really good plans and retreats and all that stuff? Is that something that you, in your experience, most clubs have nailed down, or is that something that's like, kind of hit and miss?
Well, I would say, based on the fact that we're doing a couple hundred board retreats a year, with clubs that we've either worked with doing search or consulting, but I would say probably 1 in 4, it's unfortunately, are totally ready. I would say another 2 are trying to get their governance to a place where it's structured and everything just kind of happens automatically. Everybody knows their role. And then there's probably 25% that just aren't focusing on it. And every year they get a new president, and it's just like the GM's just waiting to hear what they're going to be focused on for the year because it changes every year. So I would say, I'd say most clubs are working on it. I'd say 25% of them have it dialed in. The other 50% are in the process of dialing it in. And then I think the other 25% are so dysfunctional that it's like just survive. If you get a bad president, survive that year and hope that the next one's better versus having some real structure around it. So, I'd say, almost all clubs are focusing on it in some way. It really gets down to really strong manager and a president that understands how important good governance is. And it's not his or her time to do their pet project, but it's his or her time to be a good steward and make sure that they leave the club better than they found it. If we had presidents, well, GMs too, there's some GMs that try to make everything about them, but it's got, the most important thing you've got to remember is you're a steward. Leave the club better than you found it. That's how a president and a board member should be thinking. A lot of times they don't think like stewards. A lot of times they think, boy, my group that I hang out with there at the club really want the bunkers redone. So come hell or high water, I'm getting these bunkers redone while I'm president. And that is not stewardship, as you know.
Yeah, and so often where it seems to me is you also have these people, they want to leave their mark in some way, right? It's like, this is what I accomplished as president, and it's like it matters in even if it doesn't fit with the vision. I mean, I don't know how often that happens, but it's like you have this impression sometimes like, wow, this president just really wanted to hang his hat on something, his or her hat on something, which
I had a great my first. Arnold Palmer, obviously, when I was at Oakmont as the GM, was at the club, and he had met me. I met him through Mark McCormick from IMG Sports when I grew up in Cleveland at the country club. But when I became the manager, he came up and he said, do you remember me? I'm like, yeah, Mr. Palmer, I remember you. But one of the things he said was that he taught me, and I remember the story because he basically said, just to keep it short, he basically just said, Tom, you're going to be a steward here. He said, this club will be long before you got here, and it'll be here long after you leave. And I remember thinking, I'm never leaving. And sure enough, I did. After 10 years, I left. But he said, you're a steward. So remember why Mr. Phones built this place and leave it better than you found it. And I said, got it. And he said, good. And he walked away and went and played golf. And I remember just sitting there. One, wow. It's just cool to have that conversation. But two,
no doubt,
that's exactly how I should be thinking about it. This club will be here longer than it was here way before I was around on the earth, and it'll be here long after I'm gone. So really, if you can penetrate your board and your president's mindset with that, you're really going to have people thinking about the long-term stuff versus the short-term. I was in a club a couple days ago where every room was named after a past president, and I said, the first thing I said was, this clubhouse seems a little disjointed. And the gentleman that was touring me around said, yeah, we went through about a decade where every president wanted to build a room, and we did. And they put their name on it. And I said, wow. I said, that's not stewardship, clearly. There's probably bad governance there. And quite honestly, when there's bad governance, a big part of it is that the rest of the membership don't know where the club's going either. If you have a well-educated club that understands the strategy and the lineage of the club, they're going to go, that doesn't align with who we are or where we want to go. But right. If you don't have that in your membership, nobody's going to hold them accountable. It's very difficult for a manager to hold the president accountable if there's no barriers put in place.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting that example of the rooms makes me think of the old sports analogy or sports saying of the name on the front is more important than the name on the back,
there you go.
Of your jersey. Yeah. It's that same kind of idea. But,
I can always tell whenever I pull up to a club and the president or the GM has their own parking spot, I'm like, oh boy, right. Yeah, it's not good. Right, yeah. Now I'm okay if you're like the club champion or something. That's kind of fun. But because you're the president or the GM, you probably shouldn't have the first parking spot.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe in the what do you call it? The other lot, the satellite lot.
Yeah, the secondary. The auxiliary lot. Yeah, exactly.
But I guess just to set a little context around this too is that, it just seems to me that when you live in communities that have private clubs, you hear rumors about, oh, they're screwed up. They don't seem to know, or they really seem to, they're transitioning or whatever. Like you hear the culture stories. And to me, it's like so often it can be traced back to some of these things. Can it? I mean, it's like bad club culture, just like any organization, doesn't start from the top down.
Well, there's two cultures at a club. I always like to say the magic happens where the member culture and the team culture and the traditions kind of coincide. Like that little space where they touch. That's where the coolness. That's where the traditions of the club are understood. That's where who we are, who we want to be in the future is understood. How we got here, the history. But you have to have those two cultures in alignment. And that's one of the things. You could have great culture, employee culture, but if the governance is culture and the member culture is not good, you're not going anywhere. I think bad culture, it happens when you're not paying attention to it. A good GM can pay attention to both, but the board and the president have to own the member culture. They have to engage the members, they have to educate the members, and they have to make sure that they're asking the members the right questions so that they go in the right direction. At the end of the day, if I led a team, my employees, my team, they knew exactly what I wanted to accomplish, how I wanted to get there, and why I thought it was the right thing to do. Not every board does that in a powerful way with the membership. And when the members don't feel connected to it, that's when the cries that, they're up to something. We don't know what they're doing. There's no transparency. And when the members feel like there's a lack of transparency, that's hard to dig out of that hole.
Right. So that's interesting because you hear a lot of that at different clubs, and some of the, as you and I were talking before we started recording, that seems to be, there seems to be more of that, or I don't know if it's any more or less than in the past, but that it definitely exists. What are some of the signs, though, that maybe there's some alignment issues with the board? I mean, what are the early indicators that maybe the clubs are losing something as they transition from one board to the next, or as leadership shifts?
Yeah, I always there's that Hemingway quote. First it's gradually, and then it's suddenly. I think when you start, when you're, again, if you're not really paying attention to it, it starts to erode. But then if it's eroding a little bit at a time, all of a sudden you get a bad president that doesn't have a strategic plan, that isn't using data, that is focused on small things versus long range big things. Those are the signs that you're heading in the wrong direction. But just one of those probably doesn't get your stress level up as a GM. But if two or three of those start to block together, then all of a sudden you've got bad governance, and it takes a lot more. We have a saying as managers and as consultants now. I can't say it's not true. You're one bad president away from really having bad culture and setting the club on a bad course. But I also think it's the general managers, one of their big jobs is to make sure there's structure in place, so no matter who the president is, we use data to make decisions, not emotion. We have a strategic plan, so I don't need your direction, sir or ma'am, because we already know where we're going. What I need is your support in making sure that we continue on the path that we were on last year. Those are the things that need to be in place. So if you're not using data, that's a pretty good sign that you've got problems. If you don't have good orientations, good structure, good job descriptions for your committees and board members, that's another sign. And then ultimately, if you don't have an overall strategy / business plan for your club, here's who we are, here's who our mission and vision, here are our core values. If all those things are missing, if a little of them are missing and you're working towards it, you're fine. But if they're starting to deteriorate and no one's paying attention to it, that can be pretty scary. As a president and a GM, you absolutely want to know what the core values of the club are. I used to say as a GM, that's how I made decisions. Like if no one was around and the pressure was on me to make an immediate decision, I always would say, does this decision align with our core values? If it does, I could stand up and defend myself. If it doesn't, I'm not going to do it, because at the end of the day, I probably won't be able to defend it if indeed it doesn't align with the core values of the club.
Yeah, it's so that delineation between the club manager and the board and their responsibilities within that, I think sometimes that's confusing and it gets blurred a lot, right? I mean, it's like, because so many general managers are like, well, I got to do what the board says because they're going to be the ones who ultimately fire me. And if I, as opposed to saying, hey, your job is this, you're going to get fired for not doing your job,
Yeah. Yeah. And at the end of the day, you need to make sure that you've got the board aligned around what good governance looks like. Again, going back to the stewardship, is this in alignment with our plan? General managers, and we place 100 or plus a year, and one of the things they always want within their first year, if the club doesn't have a business plan, strategic business planning, they want one. They said, how hard it is to run a business that doesn't have a plan. And it is hard. But a big piece of that is the governance and the structure for how these transitions take place. One of the reasons I think clubs struggle and there's constant dysfunction is because of the transition. A manager could have everything dialed in, but if you only have a one-year president, by the time they learn what they're to do and how to do it and how to be a good steward, they're gone.
Right.
So you have to have good structure in place. I externed when I was still at Country at the Ritz-Carlton, and one of the things I learned there that I took with me the rest of my life, I learned a lot of things there, but if it's not written down, it doesn't exist. And the general manager there told me that because he said, at the Ritz-Carlton, if you have a question, we've already answered it for you, and it's in one of these binders. And I was like, and he said, clubs don't have that. And when you go in the clubs and they don't have a strategic plan, a business plan, they don't have a board policy manual, they don't have a formal orientation for new members, new employees, new committee members, new board members, I can tell right away what the club's going to be like. I could tell what the level of function's like at the governance level. If you don't have the things in place to make sure, now, can you force people to read it? No, but at least you have the structure there and there's some understanding. I will say this, almost every member, there's a small portion of every membership that's just, born miserable and will pass away miserable. But the majority of members at a club, the majority of them love the club, love the employees, and want to do the right thing. But in the absence of structure, all these people are very, very successful. If they don't have structure to keep them in line, then they'll start to do things that they want to do versus do what they're supposed to do. I always think of governance like bumper bowling for your kids. Like it's not going to guarantee you're going to throw strikes every time, but I can't let my board president throw any gutter balls either. So that's my job as a GM, is to make sure there's enough structure that they don't drive us off a cliff. At the same time, you have to give them a little anonymity to move around and do the things that they want to do within the confines of a good governance model.
Yeah, got it. Interesting. Scott, there are like 5 questions off of that I want to ask you, but let me just start with, no, there's so many interesting points. So I've had several episodes this year on governance, and just because I think it's such an important part of the health, long-term health of the club to have like just really solid governance. You guys do work with Interlocking in Interlocking Country Club in Edina, and so full disclosure there. However, I talked to Joel Livingood a couple months ago. He was a guest on one of my episodes, and it ended up becoming very much about mission, vision, values. And I'm just such a believer in mission, vision, values, and just in a commitment to that. And like you said, if you're all alone and you have to make a decision, that should be even your core values. I mean, those 3 things should be able to help you make the right decision.
Absolutely.
I mean, really, not to rush to the solution, but at the crux of so much board ambiguity and confusion sometimes, is it really a lack of clarity around those 3 things? And, a lot of clubs have values and we've got our mission, but it just isn't as solid as maybe as it could be.
Yeah, well, and the opposite of what my friend at the Ritz taught me, you could have it written down. If you're not living it and it's not embedded in the day-to-day culture, but both of the members and the staff, it's just a piece of paper. It's just a bunch of words. If you're living it, Joel's a great example. I've watched that young man. I think he's one of the top managers in the country, one of the top thought leaders in the country. What he's done there is he had an incredible president. He's incredibly entrepreneurial, and he's a visionary. And what they've done there in a very short period of time, there are some bigger, more larger clubs, but I think the amenities that they've created there, the member experience and the buy-in, the ability to get that club to spend the millions and millions of dollars that they've spent has been because they believed in the governance of the club, they believed in the president and the structure of the board, and they believed in Joel and his team. And once you have that, you can soar. I mean, it's not to say the managers that were there in the past weren't great, but what they didn't have is alignment with the board and alignment with the staff. And once they had that, that lit a rocket for that club. I don't think they'll ever look back.
$100 million in capital improvements. It's crazy. So how do you get there? Like you said, having that alignment with the president and manager, like for clubs that aren't there, some clubs may not even realize that they're not there, right? But for the clubs that do realize that and say, gosh, we're not there yet. And it's probably not an easy answer, right? But how do you get to that point?
Yeah, there's so many steps. I think the first thing is really making sure that you have a strategic business plan. Once, all right, you have that, you have a mission, you have a vision, you have core values. That, then having powerful orientations, mandatory, so that you're making sure you're taking people through that so that they understand this is the role of the GM, this is the role of the president, and this is the role of a board member or committee, all the way down, and making sure that's just everybody knows. I think Joe Kren, who's another one of the top leaders in the industry, he always tells a story about how he always sits down with every board member, but specifically the president, and asks his new president, when I want to disagree with you, how can I disagree with you without fracturing our very important relationship so that we can continue to be successful? And he says, well, every president says, oh, don't worry about that, we're not going to disagree. And he's like, oh, no, we will. He said, if this is going to be dynamic and this business is going to continue to grow, we're going to have disagreements. I just want to know how you'd like me to do that with you so that we can to maintain a great relationship. So having those one-on-one conversations, being in lockstep with your president, really means taking your strategic business plan, orienting everybody to the plan and to their roles and responsibilities, and then focusing only on the things that are what happens is boards get into operations, as I'm sure you've heard. Instead of focusing on I could look at a board agenda or board minutes of a club and tell right away if they're a high performer or not. If they're talking about soup and the prizes for invitational, you've got a problem. If they're talking about the 10-year master or capital plan, if they're talking about capital reserve studies, if they're talking about future demographics of the club, those kind of things tell me that's a strategic board. If they're talking about operations, then this is a slow-moving club. This is not a cheetah. This is a snail. They still in that 50% that have some work to do. But you have to build all that structure, and then you have to just learn how to hold them accountable to those types of things. Make sure the agendas are very strategic focused. Make sure you're having town hall meetings, communicating with everyone about what's going on. Make sure you're surveying. Boards are always like, we went out to market. We went out to pitch this $25 million capital project, and we only, it failed. It was 49-51. It failed. And I said, well, when's the last time you just had a general understanding of how happy your members are? Oh, well, we did a survey 5 years ago. I said, I would never send out a request for an assessment or a major dues increase without already knowing what's the general mood of the membership. What's the satisfaction level? Do they feel connected to the board? Do they feel connected to the paid staff? And then if you have good marks there, I would stand behind the fact that if they'd recommend the club to a friend, they're highly satisfied, they like the team, you're probably going to get a passing grade on the assessment. But if you don't know that, why would you risk it?
Right, exactly. I want to go back to something else. I mean, that seems like a very common thing as well, but I want to go back to something else you were talking about. And I'm just wondering, you can get that alignment. Let's just say you've got a new board, new club president that is we're locked in. We know what we're going to focus on. We have our priorities straight. But then in that transition, something's lost. What is it? Yeah.
Poor succession planning, I think, is what happens. I think, if you're at a club and there's many of these clubs, which is disappointing, you could have a president come in and be a first-year board member and the next president. But great clubs, they know for 2-3 years who the next presidents are. And if they're really lucky, they have a 2-year president or a 3-year president, because then you really can get some continuity and get some things done. I would tell you the clubs that I worked at in I managed 3 clubs, and I would tell you that when I had long-term presidents, 2-3 years or plus, we got more done. Because we found our love language, and we knew how to talk to each other, and we had a plan and we worked the plan. But when you're transitioning a president that may not have ever even been on the board, so succession planning is a big part. You've got to make sure that you already have your vice president in line, or the next president should be on the board, paying attention, listening. Great presidents always bring along their next couple of presidents. It might not be Steve, but it might be Bob, but either one would be great. And I'm including them on all our emails, and I want them to sit in on all the construction meetings. I want them to sit in on all the strategic planning meetings so that if there's one question general managers always ask when we're interviewing general managers. I'm meeting my president now. Who are my next couple presidents? And if you say to them, we don't know, that is a club where people are going to think twice about going to, because if you're only guaranteed 1 year with the person and you're at a good club with continuity, why would you go to a place where, I mean, I've seen it at clubs where we've had presidents, they've voted in as a board member and become the president. They've not been involved at the club at all. No committees. They haven't worked on the committees. Great clubs don't select anybody to be on the board that haven't already showed that they can work well at the committee level.
Yeah.
Clubs are full of super smart people, but you have to make sure they can work well with others, build consensus, and get work done.
Right.
Great clubs go back to the committees and say, what committees are high performing? What committees are actually producing work that is helping the club? And those are the only people that get recruited. Where the succession plan breaks down is when you can be on the board, even if you haven't already showed that you can work well with others. I would tell you, just because you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company doesn't mean you'd be a good board president or a good board member. Oftentimes you're not, because you're used to things happening, especially if you don't have a board of your own. If you're a business owner of a $100 million company, you probably don't have many people questioning you. So the first time you get 11 other board members saying, I don't think you're right, they get their dander up, and then the dysfunction starts.
Yeah, interesting. So one of the things I'm hearing you say, just in general, 1-year terms for presidents is,
Exactly.
I mean, you're asking for more challenges, really, with transition. Is that,
Absolutely. If you have to have a 1-year president, if that's just you can't get your bylaws changed, then your vice president, your officers, your treasurer, secretary, vice president, that should be your succession plan. Okay, I'm only president for a year, but Bill's after me, then Susan, then Tina. So for the next 4 years, not only do I know who my president is, they've been on the board, they're in the meetings, they know what we're doing, so you don't have to reteach. One of the most frustrating parts, where I think sometimes managers just let the new president take the reins, is it's a lot to retrain a board president that is walking in without any background. But so if you have to have a 1-year presidency, make sure that you have that succession plan in place, that the officers move up into the presidency. But if you can have a 2-year or a 3-year, that's even better. Obviously, if you get a bad president and they're there 3 years versus 1, that's somewhat problematic.
That's problematic.
Yeah, but if you're
impeachment.
But if the number one thing is, we do board retreats. Kurt does 5-6 hour board retreats. I do 3-4 hour board retreats. And the one thing I say at the beginning and the end, that I say, if you remember anything today, anything at all as board members, remember that your sole job, the most important thing you need to do, is make sure that anybody that gets on this board in the future are the best that Acme Country Club has to offer. Are people that understand being stewards, like the management staff, like the plan, all those kind of things. And they say, why do you open and close with that? I said, because you can have all the structure, but if you just get bad people on the board, bad things are going to happen. I remember as a young man, I used to have a president that said, well, this guy's a real troublemaker. He doesn't like us. He doesn't like where we're heading. So I'm going to put him on the board. I was like, why would we do that? He's like, oh, this is what we do in the corporate world. We bring them under the tent. I said, don't bring them under my tent. I said, because all they're going to do is slow down our momentum. If you have the majority of the members that are in line with what you want to do and are excited and trust you, you don't need to bring that small percentage that just dislike everything. But that is sometimes a habit. Sometimes presidents and boards get so focused on the vocal minority. It's the squeaky wheel thing, gets the oil. Right. And really training them to do that. But that starts with a really good, robust leadership development plan, making sure that you're very thoughtful about who gets on your committees, and the committees become your training ground for the board, and then you monitor the committees to see who the high performers are, and then they matriculate up to the board. If you can put that in place, that's really all the other stuff is, I think, table stakes in our industry, but really focusing on how people get onto committees and boards will ensure that you have a high functioning, from a governance perspective, club.
I love that, and it makes so much sense too. Because I mean, you're seeing your leadership chain and your leadership develop in the club too. This is just kind of just a thought. So why don't more clubs want to go from a 1-year term for president to 2? Is it just because, I mean, it seems like the members would pass something like that if, members are going, all right, now it's 2 years. But why aren't there more? Or are there more?
I think it is, there are more and more, but it's not as prevalent as we wish it would be. And I think sometimes, it should be a good job to become the president of a high-functioning club. I think if you're the president working with Joel Livingood, Joe Kren, Brett Morris, Michael McCarthy, I think it's probably a good job. It's fun and it's rewarding. But I also think there's horror stories of, Bob was president for a year, and as soon as he got off the board, he quit the club because it was so brutal, and that still happens too. So I think it's a little of both. It does normally require a bylaws change, which I think sometimes people are like, well, why would they want to change that structure? And I think you just need the right president or right manager to have focus groups and say, hey, listen, we're going to spend $30 million in the next 5 years. I can't be retraining a new president every year while we're in the midst of doing this. I need some continuity, and they'll absolutely pass it, but it does take going to the members and getting a vote, and sometimes they just don't want to do it.
Right. Yeah, I gotcha. I want to go back to just the recruiting process, and so often what you'll hear people say is that, the problem with our board is they're all old. And they don't have enough young people. There's not enough new young ideas that are coming to the board. And I would just love your thoughts on that, especially in the context of what we're just saying, which is like really recruiting people to the board who have shown a level of, efficiency, performance, whatever you want to say in the committee level. What is your thought about that in general, about boards getting younger, as opposed, you know what I mean?
Yeah, you absolutely. You have to attack it. You have to be thoughtful about it. You want to make sure the reason that happens is because you're not recruiting. You're not being thoughtful about, okay, who's getting on the committees. You want a broad brush of members. You want newer members. You want younger members. You want long tenured members. You want older members. You need a little bit of everything on your committees, because that's how you're going to get good feedback, at the committee level, but you also need to recruit. We always used to say, as a manager, anybody that wants to be on the board, you might want to just double check, what is it why is it? Now, many people want to get on because they love the club and they think they can help. But to test that theory, put them on a committee for a couple years. See if they make the meetings. If you have 6 meetings a year and they make 2 of them, not a good board member. If that committee had 3 or 4 goals for the year and they didn't accomplish any of them, probably not a good committee to recruit off of. But if you have committees that have good attendance, they're accomplishing things, you're gonna get the right people. What clubs have done is they've gone away from the nominating committee, and they've gone to a typically what they'll call a leadership development committee. They'll go ahead and have a group, typically a couple past presidents and then some members at large. And this group, not only do they populate the board slate for the year, but they'll also be the group that picks the committee members. One thing we could tell you, and I think the data would root this out, is if you're a committee chair as a board member and you get to pick your committee, most times you pick your friends. You pick like-minded people that are your age. And right. So you don't, it's not to say they're bad people, but we want a better swatch of the demographic. So you go and you say, okay, we're going to pick the committee that you chair, but we're going to pick the people you're not, because we need to get 15 or 16 great people. That is a nice pool for us to pull from, and then we'll watch them for a year. So the leadership development committee, there are 2 big jobs for the year, 3 really. 1, populate the committees. So they're going out and recruiting. And one of the things we know about the industry and young people that are members now, they don't want to volunteer. They think like customers. They don't think like owners. So when they join a club, generationally, I'm a Gen Xer. Our generation was super small, and a lot of us didn't join clubs. So now our children are getting into clubs, but they didn't grow up in clubs. So a lot of them don't understand that if you're a club member, you're an owner, not a customer. This isn't LA Fitness. This is a place with history and lineage that you have to understand. And oh, by the way, you're going to pay for the ability to donate your time, and that's expected of you. So a lot of clubs have really focused on it during orientation of their new members. Part of our culture is we may tap you on the shoulder, might be this year, might be 10 years from now, to volunteer for a committee. Our expectation would be you'd say yes, because that's part of our history at the club. But you have to do that at the beginning, because if you don't tell young people that, they are very transactional. They just want to come to the club, use it, and go home. But you have to tell them, no, you could do that, but we're also going to need you to volunteer your time to make sure that this club is not only great for you, but for your kids and their kids. And clubs are doing a really good job of telling that story.
Well, I love the idea of that being part of the orientation, with a new member coming on. There's so many other things around that too, just to level set what the expectation is for the club, and how things work. And, and obviously the club has to back it up. Otherwise they get in and they're like, wait, that's not how it works. There's going to be this. It's not that, It's interesting.
You can't tell that story and not live the story. It's you've got your training has to be factual.
Yeah, absolutely. Some great stuff in there. Just a couple more things out, and this is very much, I think, probably more promotional, even though it's maybe not the core of what KKNW does, but board retreats. Can you just talk about the value of that? And I get, like, just for, if you're listening to this podcast, this is not just like, Tom didn't say, I'll do this interview if you ask me about this, but it just the idea, so our company used EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, which is based on a book called Traction by Gino Wickman. Anyway, and we would do, for several years, we do quarterly meetings with our facilitator, an annual meeting. I mean, we spent a lot of money as a small business on this, but what it did for us from mission, vision, values, from just alignment, communication, transparency, all those things, it was incredibly helpful for us. But a lot of clubs, I'm assuming, I know that you're doing a lot of these, but there are probably a lot of clubs that don't do board retreats. And what are they missing that they should know about?
Well, what's disappointing is one of the things, the clubs that need us the most typically aren't using us or can't afford us. So we've tried to create lots of different things. We work with Boardroom magazine to put together some videos to train new committee members, new board members. One of the things we're fearful of is you're a young manager. It's hard for you to get up and stand up in front of 12 board members that are high-functioning, successful people, and then tell them how board meetings are going to run. When it's difficult. And I remember as a young manager, I was like, I don't want to tell them I don't want to tell them how to run, how this business runs. They know more. They know more than me. But in actuality, you could be a Fortune 100 CEO. You could be on every not-for-profit board in the world, but clubs are different, and they need to understand what the playing field is like. We like doing them because it supports the general manager, it supports the board, but it just allows everybody to hopefully put their guard down and understand, hey, here are a bunch of things you're doing right, here are a bunch of things you're doing wrong, and here's the tools you could use to get on the right side of them. And the number one thing is a self-evaluation. We ask the board members to rank themselves against 25 different data points, and it's really always enlightening. I always say the first time we work with a club, they give themselves, we usually do it on a 7-point scale, they give themselves 6 or 7s out of 7, and then I go, oh, so you all communicate very well with the members? And they're like, yes, we gave 6.5 out of 7. Okay, how do you communicate with the members? And they're like, well, we have a newsletter. And I'm like, okay, give me more. They're like, no, that's it. I'm like, okay, well, let me tell you what the best clubs in the country are doing. They're doing this, and it's usually like, so the board's doing 5 to 6 things a month, and you're doing 1. And they're like, oh. They're like, maybe we would have given ourselves a lower score. I'm like, of course you would. But we're not there to play gotcha. We're there to help you understand, like, this is what you're doing, but this is what you could be doing. And you're not going to get there. That's another thing I always say is, don't try to do everything we talk about today in the next year. Good governance is a process, not an event. It takes 3 or 4 years to get all the pieces in place, and then actually everybody's got to play their part thereafter. So, get the structure in place, but then hold to it. And a lot of times, presidents are like, I want to do all that. It's like, no, you're going to kill your manager, and you're not going to get it done if you don't do it at a good pace. But first the assessment, that opens up. Then there's dialogue. Everybody's defensive at first. They think it's like, listen, I'm not here to play gotcha. I'm here to help. And then we spend the rest of the couple hours really diving into the holes, where the big holes are. And then one of the thing I love is when we leave, I'm like, okay, here are the things I think are the most important that you work on in the next 18 months. Here's what I do the second 18 months, and here's what I do in the third sector. And we provide that to the club just as a roadmap. I said, listen, this is just how I would do it. You all can sit down together and think it through. But they love it because they're like, you should come back every year. I'm like, actually, we should come back every year because you're going to have a third of the board's going to be new next year, and they will not have participated in this. There are many clubs. Kurt's done Medina Country Club, I think, 15 straight years, and they're a high functioning club because they make, even if you're a board member that sat through it last year, they make you sit through it again because there's always something new, and your role. And if you've sat through 4 or 5 of those retreats, and then you become president, it's hard to believe you wouldn't understand what your role is and how you should do things and how to make sure you're a great president.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that's so, I mean, it gives a new definition of long range planning or another perspective of long range planning that, clubs I know so often like to do. And a lot of times it's around facilities and things like that. But I mean, what a great way to hold a mirror up to your club to say, just like you said, how good are we actually?
And it's always surprising, and we're pretty functional. By the end, they're like, "We're so glad you came." And it's the same dynamic. I think we did 150 last year. It's the same dynamic. They're very quiet, very standoffish. By the lunch break, they're like telling you who they know from your background. I had a friend at Oakmont. I knew a guy at Mediterra. And then by the time you're leaving, they're like giving you their cards. Like, we may need this at our own business, and it's like, well, it's like. So I think most members, as I've said, they love their club, they're thoughtful, they're well-meaning, but if you don't have the right structure in place, a strong manager, and good culture around your governance, then it's really hard to make it all work and keep everybody rolling in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, Tom, I really appreciate your time and your insight and a lot of good nuggets to take away from our conversation today. So thank you so much.
You bet.
All right. Well, we'll see you. I think we'll probably see you at CMAA.
Yeah. Definitely.
Anaheim. Yeah, yep. The KKW booth, man. You guys are you're like the popular kids at school. Everyone's, and you guys got that power alley there. I mean, it's always good to see you guys over there.
Well, it's a treat. It's one of the cool things about my life is that I work for 2 guys that I literally grew up idolizing, and Kurt and Dick. And people are like, what's the best part about it? I go, it's hard. I travel over 200 days a year. I said, I'm still grinding like I did when I managed. I go, but the 2 people that I work most closely with and have built this business with are guys that I love as human beings. And it's gone from looking up to them to, now just loving them like family, and which has been pretty cool. And not everybody, not everybody gets to work in that kind of environment.
Yeah. Well, it's awesome. And appreciate all that you guys do, and thanks for your time today. Thank you for listening. If you find episodes like this helpful, be sure to share it and subscribe on whatever podcast platform you're using. Until next time, keep crushing your club marketing.